to talk with us.
Yeah, so right now it's just the cloud cover, but as we eventually transition into the overnight, that's when more of that ice starts to become a bit more apparent. And if we have to nail down a timing, right now it's looking more likely midnight to about 4 a.m. would bring us the worst of the conditions. And that means in terms of the freezing rain and or sleet that's going to be working its way into northeast Ohio. Eventually, we're going to see temperatures warm up, and a lot of the newer data continues to push this warming trend a little sooner, which would not be a bad thing when you factor in we're then getting closer and closer to that morning commute time. So once it starts to change over to rain and temperatures start climbing a bit more above 32 degrees, that should allow some of that ice to start melting. But I still think we're going to be dealing with spots where travel is going to be impacted tomorrow morning, and you're going to have some very slick areas, especially on some of those side roads, bridges and overpasses, just because that temperature can stay just a little bit cooler for you. You'll notice winter weather advisories have been posted for everybody for tomorrow morning. Typically in northeast Ohio, when we see these winter weather advisories, it's for the snow impacts, but that is not going to be the case this time around. This is really just for that freezing rain that's eventually going to be working its way through. Now, you'll notice as we go through your ice tracker through about 9 o'clock this evening, most of us are going to stay pretty quiet. There may be a few select spots that between 7 to 8 o'clock this evening, we start getting a little bit of that mixing starting to occur down to the southwest. So think of places like Mansfield down towards the Worcester area. But eventually, as we go through tomorrow morning, you see how quickly we start to fill in a lot of those colors. And at times, I mean, we could be talking about a tenth to almost 2/10 of an inch of ice in some spots. And that is pretty significant when you're talking about ice accumulation. So please budget a lot of extra time to get where you need to be, especially when you consider that Thursday morning commute. As for today, can't rule out a little bit of light snow trying to mix in. This is not going to be a huge snowmaker for most of us. Really, the big story is going to be once we start seeing that sleet and or freezing rain starting to work through, you'll see temperatures basically stay below freezing throughout the entire day today. So it means our ground temperature is certainly cold enough that the second you start getting some of that freezing rain, it's going to have no problem sticking and eventually accumulating on some of those road surfaces. By about 3 o'clock in the morning, you're starting to see a little bit more of this rain. Keep in mind, temperatures are still lower 30s. Even if you sit at 33 degrees and you're getting that cold rain falling, your ground temperature is still well below zero. So a lot of that rain will likely still be freezing on contact, but the more we can see those mid-30s working in, the better that starts to turn for us in terms of seeing a little bit more of that ice starting to melt and things becoming a bit easier going for us, especially out on the roadways tomorrow. So just keep that in mind. We're going to really be watching this closely here as we go through tonight. The team will have you covered on this, especially headed into tomorrow morning as well. A few morning flurries possible Friday, and then we get to gear up for yet again another system coming in this weekend. We'll talk a little bit more about that one coming up in the next half hour. So this is not an all-day event today, nor will it be an all-day event headed into tomorrow. It's really going to be centered during that main window when we're going to see the best chance for not only sleet, but then that freezing rain becoming a bit more widespread across the area. And really, the closer you get to midnight tonight, the more we're talking about everybody starting to get in on some of that freezing rain. Then we get into tomorrow morning, and we finally start to see temperatures warming above freezing, which is why you don't see this winter weather advisory last essentially beyond 10 a.m. tomorrow, because by that point temperatures should be into the mid-30s, and we're then working on melting away a lot more of that ice that will have accumulated through those overnight hours. So please make sure you just kind of keep an eye on the forecast here, especially as we go to bed tonight, wake up early tomorrow morning, because you may need to budget just a little bit of extra time to get where you need to be. Let's kind of recap what we're talking about here, and let's bring in a little bit more of the science. So when we're talking about rain versus snow, rain means your entire column of air from the cloud down to the ground, you're above 32 degrees. Snow, you're below 32 degrees. But then you get into those in-between scenarios where temperatures start to get just a little bit cooler in certain parts of our atmosphere. If it's cooler a little farther up, certainly that's when you're going to have the best chance for us to still be dealing with some of that sleet before it eventually melts in that warmer column of air closer to the ground. If you are staying pretty warm, keeping that whole column of air mainly as rain, but then the ground is still cold enough, that's when that rain can start freezing on contact, and that's when you have bigger issues when it comes to things like freezing rain. Bridges and overpasses start to get slick, and you just start to run into a lot more of those issues. So please be mindful that kind of when we're talking about these scenarios, especially with freezing rain and or some of that sleet, it doesn't take much to cause a lot of issues across our area. So making sure you have several ways of being alerted as we kind of go through this event, that is certainly going to be key for us. That 19 First Alert weather app, a great tool to have with you when we're talking about active weather like this. We'll talk a little bit more about this coming up on First Alert Focus, and certainly we'll have a bit more coming up in your forecast in just a few minutes.